Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant, Managing Director of Reputation Management Caribbean. Lisa and Joseph, she gracefully agreed to bless us with her presence and expertise a little more. Because in our last conversation, we looked at crisis communications, specifically more external to an organization. This time, our focus turns inward towards effective communication within an organization. I really want to thank you for making the time so we could talk about it a little further, because sometimes you try to get everything into one episode and things will suffer. We're not able to ventilate as much.
Yes.
But to hark back to the last conversation, we spoke about communications during a crisis, but that was more from within to outside of the company or the organization. Mm-hmm. If we were to turn solely inward, what are some of those factors that we need to kind of check boxes off of to make sure that stakeholders, internal stakeholders, are being told what they need, and even that difference, knowing or the understanding what they need to?
Well, you have to get the organization prepared. Prepared from the standpoint of what is the tone set from the top? How the tone is set from the board and the CEO and the executive team. What is that tone? Are we ready to communicate? In a crisis situation, you have to communicate internally. In the absence of communication, there's speculation. And when there's speculation, you have to, speculation can come from anywhere. And with social media, you know, that thing we have, it is a blessing and it is also the devil. So in the absence of communication, we can get information in the palm of our hands, real time. You, as the organization head, must make that decision to communicate. And it comes back with our previous discussion. To prepare, you have to prepare not only the having the plans and so in place, but you have to prepare your people to communicate. Because in a crisis situation, it is not only the CEO that has to communicate. The rest of the team, the executive team, must communicate. But you have to make sure all the messages come from one source. You know, they say everybody must speak from the same or sing from the same songbook. You have to have a centralized approach to the messages. Again, the same process is the same as external communication. You have to prepare for it. So your communication planning must have the treating with the internal audience. And I'm talking from an organization that has like 5 people to a few hundreds or thousands of people. The planning process, while of course it will scale up depending on your organization, but the process has to be the same. The intention must be from the top, that in a crisis situation, we must communicate. We must communicate in different ways. We have different audiences within our internal organization, and therefore we have to get the messages out. We may have staff on the road, you know, staff working out in the fields, staff on the road dealing with depending on the company it is. And therefore, they will not have access to a computer. They will not have access to a company phone. How do you get those messages out to them? Different audiences say getting the same message, but you have to get it out to them in different ways.
Now you're saying this, and I only hear my grandmother talking about Some fish that's rotten from the head, you know. So in terms of like taking that lead of what the leader of the organization is doing and then running with it or not running with it, because nature abhors that vacuum and people are going to fill it with different things with, like we said, being able to be content creators. And categorically, I don't want to know about any of the people that you interact with, but generally in your expertise, and this is coming back, not looking at crises per se, but in terms of communication within an organization, what are some of those challenges or the easy pitfalls that people make that can be low-hanging fruit to help make communication a little more efficient within organizations?
Well, lack of communication is the first thing. There are organizations right now, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but so my remit is the Caribbean. I deal with organizations within the Caribbean. And so when I speak, it's not just Trinidad and Tobago. So there are organizations which feel that they only need to communicate internally at specific times. So, once a quarter, probably the general all staff email, and probably a newsletter or two. So that seems, in some organizations, that seemed to be, the comfort zone. Because why? We've been doing that for a long time, and there's no need to change the status quo.
And that specifically is something that I want to talk about when we return from the break. And we'll get into that. We are speaking with the Managing Director of Reputation Management Caribbean, Lisa Ann Joseph. Stay with us. We return after this. Welcome back. We are speaking with Lisa Ann Joseph about responding or communicating effectively within organizations. She is the Managing Director of Reputation Management Caribbean. And just before we took the break, and I said, don't go any further because I want to continue on that. There's a saying that culture eats a strategy for breakfast. Somebody continue and say, what does it eat for lunch and all these sorts of things. But looking at those comfort zones sometimes, it's like once a quarter or whatever, how important is culture towards communicating, and especially if you want to communicate changes within an organization?
Well, the culture dictates the communication, so it can't go the other way. So whatever culture is embedded within an organization, and if we look at the communication aspect of it, if it is that there is little communication, and that's part of the culture, that's what you have to live with. But if you have to change that process now, which is needed within organizations, and COVID has pushed us into this space as especially medium and large organizations, we do not have a choice anymore. Communication is critical, especially if you have to look at it in a crisis. Let me tell you, a good example is this. If staff if there's a crisis situation and it has just hit, and the social media is up in flames, media calling, all these things, and the organization has not communicated to its staff, and we call staff as our brand ambassadors. We love to use that. It's our staff or our brand ambassadors. They're the ones who will have to get out and talk to people to say how good of a company that they work with. So if we accept them as brand ambassadors, therefore in a crisis situation, you have to communicate to them to help them know what's going on so that they too can communicate the messages externally. When a crisis happens, what do? If you know someone in an organization and it's your friend or your relative, you pick up the phone and you say, hey, what's going on? I heard so and so happening. What is going on? So therefore, if you don't know and you're the staff member, let's say you're on the front line and you have no clue, what would be your response? I have no idea what's going on. But I know, it's crazy stuff is going on at the on that floor. So you have to utilize your staff and you have to get the messages out to them so that they too can be the ones carrying the message. Now, they're not the spokespersons for the organization, but they help carry the message. So if it is that in good times you inculcate a free-flowing process, and free-flowing is not just top-down. It's also bottom-up, and it's also side-to-side. So if you inculcate a culture of communication in good times regularly, making sure that all parts of the stakeholder group are connected, because you have people in the admin building, you have branches, you have some of my clients have organizations throughout the Caribbean. All of that are your staff. You have to ensure that all those parts are connected. And then when you do that, and you have that as a culture, a cultural aspect of your organization, then it will work for you.
And you're saying this, and I'm thinking of the different ways that communication can go as opposed to just top down. And all I'm remembering is this story about, I think it was a toothpaste manufacturer, and there were some boxes that they were getting to places, but they were empty. They didn't have tubes inside of them. So they said, okay, how are we going to do this? Calling people with degrees and they design something that costs plenty money, and checking the weight when they're on the conveyor belt reaching a certain place. And if it's empty, it will be too light, so it will measure, alarms will go off, the process will stop, and somebody needed to get up from wherever they were to move that box to start it again. And then they realized that the alarms weren't going off. They called back the engineer who tested the system, charged a big piece of money again, and said, it's working well, everything is happening. And when they found the person who was to get up and move the empty box, the person said, I tired, get up and shift from quiet to there, so I put a fan. So all the empty box get blow off the conveyor belt. So it's very different methodologies to come to the same place. Mm-hmm. If they're consulted within, if that person who had to change or move the box felt empowered enough to have this conversation, they could have saved themselves some money, people could have get dividends different ways and all this sort of thing. So in terms of that communication, it's so important. But you spoke about medium and large organizations. What about the small organization that is doing well? So they want to scale up a little bit. So as opposed to one brick and mortar in one place, they're going to have another branch somewhere else. How does communication, does it change? And if so, how?
Well, it changes for the small business owner because you have one outlet and everybody is within the same space. So it's easier to get that communication going. When you begin to scale, now you have to begin to ensure that the communication gets to the other branches. And it's the same approach, but on a smaller scale. But it comes right back to intentional communication. You as the owner, you as the CEO, you as the chairman, wherever you sit, you as the executive team, you are the chief, whatever in your organization, you have to decide how we are going to communicate as an organization. And how do I ensure that my messages reach to the last person in the organizational chart? How does it reach to that person? Now, in large organizations, the CEO can't do it all. You have to ensure, and medium and small, it applies across the board. You can't do it all. You have to now ensure that your direct reports do the same thing. So you have to, again, it's part of building a culture and ensuring that these people who are part of the executive team, the leadership team, the management team, feel the same way. You have to begin to inculcate that culture within your organization to empower them as well to communicate the same messages and cascade it downwards.
We have about 2 minutes more, and I want to scale up the same question that I asked you. If you're trying to penetrate a different market, and that market, the space itself has a different culture. I remember this story of someone trying to penetrate a Spanish-speaking space with a vehicle called Nova, and nobody was buying it because Nova means it's not moving, but they couldn't understand why. What are some of the things that may need to change in communication to deal with a situation like that?
Do your research. Do your research. It's the same thing an organization has to deal with when they have communities that they serve. They go out, you bring them in, you have them tell you what are their needs, and then you have a discussion. How can we meet your needs and begin the dialogue and begin the engagement? It's the same way if you have to go into another market. You have to do your due diligence and understand not only the economic and social issues, but the cultural issues as well. And how do you fit in to that mold and provide that service? And how do you add value, which is the critical thing? How do you add value to that territory or that market, especially if it's new markets? How do you ensure that value is provided to them?
And I want to thank you, Lisa and Joseph, for providing value to the conversation and the space that we were in. Managing Director of Reputation and Management Caribbean, just letting us know. And you know what's funny? At some point in time, I ask a question and you answer with 2 words and you say it's slow, like it's real simple. We want to thank you for that. And this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant, on behalf of the entire TTT News team. Thank you so much for joining us.